When you're a member of the public and you're hearing and seeing these debates about what is in the wheelhouse of the president and what is not, and what the prerogatives of judges are and what they're not, there's a lot of rhetoric that attends these things. And every time I see a conservative say, that's a terrible decision by a judge on social media, I'll see a lot of people just reply to me mindlessly, but that's my opinion, with, nobody elected that judge. It's just a stupid judge. What right does a judge have to do this, that, or the other? And the particular example I want to ask you about that's been in the news is the debate about the Alien Enemies Act. And I don't have the exact language in front of me, but basically the executive, the president of the United States, can do certain things and take certain liberties under the Alien Enemies Act if and when there is a determination of an invasion or some other kind of incursion, and there's declared war, right? And so Donald Trump has used that to deport various people. And some judges, and one, I think a Trump appointee in the last week, has determined, the fact that you have some gang members here from another country doesn't mean that we're in a declared war against that country, Venezuela or otherwise. And it's not an invasion or an incursion the way you think about that word ordinarily. And lots of people have been complaining about that decision. But one person in particular, who I believe went to law school, and I believe went to the law school called Yale, is the Vice President of the United States, J.D. Vance. And he says with a straight face and with great stridency, right? He says, judge has no business deciding that. The president decides foreign policy. The president decides whether or not we're at risk. The president decides whether or not we have an emergency. And that's not for the judge. And so I'm paraphrasing here, they should just butt the F out. And he says it in a way that if you don't know anything and you believe in a strong executive, which by the way, I do, I just don't believe in some of these fringe theories that you've been discussing, it doesn't sound crazy, but it is in fact completely crazy what J.D. Vance says. Do you agree, and can you explain why?
Yes. So J.D. Vance and others are very good at sandwashing some of the worst fringe theories. And if I could just connect your summary of the Alien Enemies Act to the unitary executive theory that we were just talking about, one of the more frightening aspects of the Alien Enemies Act case for me has been in the government's briefs in those cases, they have asserted that the Constitution gives the president the authority to summarily expel people that the president views as a threat to the country. And that, of course, would be such a massive, far-reaching, sweeping authority, so readily susceptible to abuse. That's just one manifestation of the theory that I think puts it into the fringe theory bucket. But on J.D. Vance in particular, I mean, what is so outlandish about this is here he is relying on the fact that a federal statute, the Alien Enemies Act, gave the president certain powers. But it's a statute that gave the president only certain powers. So what these judges are doing, including the most recent Trump appointee, is saying, President, this statute only allowed you to designate certain persons from countries that are engaged in predatory incursions or declarations of war against the United States. And that just isn't true in the case of Tren de Aragua, which, by the way, is not a foreign nation. And so this statute, right, does not in fact give you the powers that you are claiming it does. And so it's not like the judges in these cases are imposing contestable visions of what the Constitution means on the president. Instead, they are just holding the president accountable to statutes passed by Congress. They are enforcing a democratically elected branch's directives and constraints on the executive branch. And so I think the idea that courts have no role to play in holding the executive accountable to the law, meaning statutes passed by Congress, is a terrifying vision of executive power, because it would mean there is nothing Congress can do to restrain or restrict what the president does.
Yeah, I mean, the way I think about it is, if you pass any statute that has some word in it that gives the president special authority in the circumstance in which that word is applicable, like invasion or incursion, then on J.D. Vance's theory, the president can pretty much get away with anything, because if the question of what's an invasion is up for debate, and you can take, sort of radical positions on it, then what's the limiting principle? So, for example, if J.D. Vance's theory is correct and President Trump's theory is correct, isn't it also true that Trump could just say, all these imports coming in from Japan are an invasion or an incursion on our sovereignty, or whatever words he wants to use? Colloquially, you can maybe make those arguments. We talk about a war on drugs. We talk about a war on terror. But colloquially, he says these imports are some kind of an invasion of products, and it puts our nation at risk. National security is invoked. I'm going to start sending Japanese Americans or other people back to Japan or elsewhere. Is there anything that, like, if J.D. Vance is correct, can't the president also do that?
Yes, I mean, the president could also declare the woke left a foreign gang whose horrible woke ideas are invading the country, right? And deport American citizens on the ground that they somehow fall under the Alien Enemies Act, right? Like, if truly courts cannot hew the president to the words of a statute, then nothing stops the president from adopting these extreme, outlandish, specious theories of what these laws could do, even if they are utterly baseless and make no sense of the law whatsoever.
I should take this opportunity to state, in tremendous self-interest, that I am not a member of the woke left. In case ICE agents are listening, that was a bad suggestion, Leah.
Sorry, I don't mean to do their work for them.
I don't want to belabor it and get overly dramatic, but I come back to this sane washing, you called it, this completely nonsensical, ridiculous, absurd concept of the judge has no role in interpreting a critical word in a statute, and the president can interpret it any way he wants, especially when he knows better. Because even at Yale, they teach you a little bit of black letter law, of what that means in terms of long-term faith that people have in the role of judges, and whether or not the judiciary will ultimately stand firm, and or what kinds of people are going to be appointed to the bench, if that's the judicial philosophy and kind of jurisprudence you're expecting from a judge.
No, I mean, I think we should absolutely understand what J.D. Vance is doing and saying to be trying to move the Overton window along the lines that you are suggesting. He is both signaling to the courts that the administration does not believe that basically any judicial review or judicial oversight of their actions is legitimate, seemingly raising the prospect of not complying with court orders, and thereby maybe worrying courts to such a degree that they might think twice before ruling against the administration or trying to order the administration to do things. I think they are also signaling, as you suggest, their preferred vision of constitutional law and what they might be looking for in judicial appointees. And, we've seen some of the appointees from the first Trump administration adopt pretty wild visions of executive power. Judge Eileen Cannon obviously comes to mind, where she basically declared that President Trump, retained some interest in documents after he was no longer in office, and he could interfere with the Department of Justice's, investigation and attempt to get the documents back. She also propounded this very odd theory of executive power that would basically call into question any and all special counsels, that had been appointed to investigate executive branch officials. So, yes, I think we should take what Vance and others are saying as attempts to muddy the waters isn't quite right, but I think move the needle.
Are you surprised to any degree that the Garcia case involving this person who's claimed to be part of a gang, even though there was an order that was supposed to prevent his deportation, sent to a notorious, terrible prison in El Salvador, that case has gotten the amount of attention it's gotten, and that if I read the polls correctly, the majority of Americans are against the deportation of this person, who may or may not be a criminal. As I keep quoting this, Judge Wilkinson sentence from his opinion from the Fourth Circuit a couple of weeks ago, because I think it's sort of the critical portion of the opinion, and it is relevant to a lot of these discussions, that the government says he's a criminal and a terrorist. And Judge Wilkinson said, Perhaps, perhaps not. And this administration keeps, I guess, banking on the fact that some core number of people in the country will just take their word for it. If they point and say, you're a terrorist, you're a threat, you're a member of a gang, and it seems like maybe that's not good enough. What lesson do you take from where public opinion is on that case?
I think this has been one of the more hopeful things to come out of a truly grotesque and horrific episode that remains ongoing, which is, I am not an optimist about the Supreme Court or about a lot of politics, but I have always held out hope that a majority of the country is not actually on board with a lot of the more catastrophic things the Trump administration is trying to do, including asserting the power to just declare someone a criminal or gang member or enemy alien and expel them to a foreign mega prison with no recourse whatsoever. I think most people, or a lot of people, understand how dangerous that kind of power is. And there's a reason why the Constitution contains a guarantee of due process that I think is intuitive to people, which is, what is to prevent the government from accusing me of being a gang member or a member of the woke left? I want the opportunity to prove my case to someone who is going to listen to the evidence. And so it gives me hope that, again, a lot of the country still recognizes the importance of that principle and that protection. And that is part of what gives me hope and part of what makes it so important for people to continue fighting and for people to continue doing the amazing journalism and reporting that has brought to light, the stories of so many of the people who have been sent to the El Salvador mega prison, not just Mr. Abrego Garcia, who was subject to an order directing that he not be removed. And he is, of course, not Venezuelan and therefore not even subject to the Alien Enemies Act proclamation. But the young gay makeup artist, the soccer player who had, some soccer tattoos, the individual who was part of another settlement and was not supposed to be removed until their asylum application was processed. There are so many individuals who were wrongfully sent to that El Salvador prison, and they were sent there in a hurried, frenzied process that was basically designed to terrorize people.
Hey folks, by now, you know what you got to do. Can't miss any episodes of the show. It's very important. And the guests will get upset if you do. Hit that subscribe button.